3, 2.
I got everybody pregnant with Barry Katz and semen.
I'm not comfortable with the tone this is taking.
If you're undeniable, you will not be denied.
If you want to be successful in show business, you get yourself a Jew white manager like Barry Katz.
Being a manager is just turning no's into yeses.
Creating holy shit moments. Undeniable.
You're fucking firing me up, Katz.
I love this man.
Is there anything else I should know? You're on. What? Now?
I'm on the air.
Barry Katz. Back in the house.
Let's do this.
All right. So excited about today. You guys are in for a treat. This is something about the entertainment business and an area where you probably didn't even think it existed, but it does. It's huge and it's growing. And this guy is a pioneer and a leader of it in the cannabis space. So what an honor. Please welcome my guest today, my friend, and also somebody I respect tremendously, Dan Rubin.
Thank you very much.
No
Appreciate
problem.
being here.
It's my pleasure. I'm so excited. The first question I have for you is, you know, you're in the cannabis space. You have to do all these things. You make all these deals. I think our audience deserves to know, what's the longest amount of time you've ever gone without ingesting a cannabis-related substance in the past 10 years?
The longest, probably 8-9 hours, depending on how long a flight is across to Europe. But that's probably the longest time.
So you're completely baked right now, is what you're saying?
No, I'm completely normal. It's it's not a crutch or an impairment. It's just spinach. It keeps you going, right? Like, it's other people have coffee, other people smoke cigarettes, and weed is just a powerful product that helps people be professional, be successful, and it's not what people used to think it was.
Do you feel like you're immune to it now? Like, for instance, like, let's say somebody like myself who's probably in his lifetime maybe had less than 5 edibles and maybe smoked weed maybe less than 5 times in my lifetime. So if you gave me like an edible that would make me feel something, for you, like, would just like one of your toes maybe curl and that's it?
No, you know, the interesting thing I found with weed is it's no different than people who drink a glass of wine a day, right? They're not getting drunk all the time. It's not having that same effect. And I feel that as weed has evolved, it's changed into more of a supplement than it is something that impairs you. So that supplement just becomes something that's natural, like taking vitamin D or anything else. It just becomes something that you don't take to get high. Like, it's not used to get high. It's used for the mellowness and creativity and stability of just dealing with everyday life.
And I know I'm asking you a lot of strange questions, but I think
not strange questions.
For the audience, I think it's important. So, like, a lot of times people, they look at a drug, and it is categorized as a drug. They kind of look at it as something related to alcohol. I know it may, but you know what I mean? And so alcohol, obviously, there's meetings, millions of meetings throughout the world for people who are powerless over alcohol. And alcohol has been known, and I think anybody would say it's been known to destroy multiple lives, not just of the person who drinks, but the person who lives with the person, or the children, or the relatives, or friends. And there's interventions, and people get sober, and they get their lives back. And I think unjustly, people associate weed with a form of, like, thing that helps you feel good, and they think of it as something also that, even though it's not like as highly addictive as crack or alcohol, we all know people who are not using weed for creativity, and they're on their couch with their, mouth open, and they don't have a job and they can't function. But there's never seems to be any or very little interventions for people on weed. So what do you say to the people, number one, who associate alcohol with weed or a relatedness to it? And secondly, how does somebody use weed as a superpower like you do, where you become the CEO of this company and there, you got deals with Ice Cube and Kevin Smith, and there's so many things happening. A new deal with Brad Williams. It's like, so obviously you're putting contracts together with people, lawyers, but you do know, I'm sure you know people who are like completely like Jim Brewer was in the movie Half Baked. Well, and so how does somebody become you using weed every day versus the characterization of the stoner, which is a negative word, on the couch that their family's like, could you get up? Could you get out? Could you have a job? Meanwhile, you're getting up early, you're doing everything, and you're working late at night.
So a couple ways I'll answer that. Just referencing Half Baked, Bob Saget had the best line about weed in that movie, which is, never had a suck dick for weed. So relative to other things out there, it's not an issue there. I think there's a couple ways to look at it. One is there's been enough research done around the impacts of cannabis on exercising, the impacts of cannabis being used instead of other kinds of opiates and pharmaceuticals as a way for people to get off kind of, hard drugs to, just anything really. It changes their lives around. So there's enough evidence behind that to suggest that it's not just one person saying, hey, this works, right? Like, the bigger thing there is kind of really why I got into the business of what I'm doing. When I got into cannabis, it was 2014. My grandmother passed away from breast cancer. She was a breast cancer survivor for 20 years, but at the end, she refused medicinal marijuana because of that stigma. And that stigma drove her to deal with pain that she didn't have to deal with because of reefer madness in the 50s, making it seem like it was a horrible thing to be doing this.
And don't lose your place. For the audience that doesn't understand the reefer madness reference, why don't you tell our audience what that
there was a movie back in the 50s, Reefer Madness, which was a government essentially made film that really made it look like smoking weed was the worst thing to ever happen to people, and it turned people into zombies essentially and destroyed their lives. So the government really used, for lack of a better term, propaganda to push this narrative that cannabis was bad. And it was at the same time as the beatniks and that stuff was really starting to take off. So it was kind of counter-programming to where society was going when it came to consumption of drugs and alcohol, right? So that kind of just drilled into a whole generation of people. And that's why we've seen a slow acceptance when it comes to new states legalizing. And that's a function of kind of the change in the makeup of those communities that are allowing for people to be more progressive thinking and seeing the data behind it. But there's been a lot of people that just, suffered. And not only people like my grandmother, but, there's been stories of children who could have had, cannabis given to them to help with seizures and all other kinds of illnesses, that because of the stigma around it, they weren't able to get access to something that could have been helpful. So for me, it's that stigma and that kind of thinking, which is what really drove me to do what I'm doing. And it was trying to shift that narrative, because nobody should, look at this as like, oh my God, this guy's a stoner sitting on the couch eating chips all day doing nothing. It's fascinating. And when you start to really kind of look deeper into the impacts of cannabis, whether it's from a religious perspective between, Rastafari and Judaism, to the impacts of cannabis in different cultures, whether it's hip hop specifically, because that's kind of where it's most known, or even more than that into sports now. The kind of things that we've seen in sports, and I'm proud to say, working with Ice Cube, he was a big driver of that when his league stopped testing for cannabis. Now,
The Big Three league.
the Big Three basketball league. Now, the thing is, his league wasn't the first league to do that. The interesting thing is, the NHL never tested for cannabis. Cannabis was never considered a performance-enhancing drug. So the league, about more than 85% of the people in the NHL smoke weed. But it was never tested, so no one had an issue with it. But all these other leagues, baseball, NFL, everybody like that did. And, you know, it was disproportionately skewed to impact players of color versus
In your opinion, why do those leagues do that?
It was just, again, societal view on cannabis. Right now, if you see what's happened, Cube was the first one to say, we're not testing for this, and made it really public. And that kind of started a domino effect.
But
right?
you don't think the NHL is being more progressive than the NBA or the National Football League? So why aren't they allowing weed in those leagues?
Well, they weren't. Now it's, I think, again, the makeup of the people involved in it. And if you looked at kind of the NHL and how things were done, it wasn't kind of a thing, right? And again, it wasn't just the cultural version of the stoner being the Cheech and Chong kind of person out there. It was also to the other spectrum. It was always a negative, sinister kind of person that was involved in cannabis as well, right? Like those were the two sides of the spectrum. And they tended to be hip-hop related as well, right? So, you know, when Snoop first came out, he wasn't hosting the Olympics, right? Like, there's a lot of problems with Death Row Records and people like that, and kind of the perception around those people. And today, you know, Snoop's amazing, and the job he just did at the Olympics was incredible, and he's still known as a stoner, right? He's everybody's stoner.
Why do you think the Olympics endorsed him?
Because it's a shift. It's a shift in how media companies look at cannabis. It's a shift at how people look at people who do consume cannabis. It's not something that is taboo anymore, right? And it's interesting because the reason for that is through legalization, what ends up happening is the newest entrants into those markets aren't younger people. It's always people that are 50 plus are the biggest new consumers in new states. And the reason for that is they finally have access to something that's not illegal, so they're willing to take a try. So it starts shifting how people see that now, right? So it becomes an evolution, right? Of just like anything else in society, right? Like how people perceive things, it shifts and everything starts to grow from it.
Got it. So take us way, way back to where you grew up, what the socioeconomic dynamic was, what your parents were like, and what was your first inspiration to get into the cannabis business, and then from that to get into the entertainment business?
Wow, that's a big question. Grew up in Toronto, middle-class Jewish family, 4 younger brothers. The worst is my mom always wanted to have a girl, so she kept trying. And, you know, on the 4th time, it was 1987, she's like, oh, we're going to go down to Detroit and get in vitro fertilization, and we're going to have, you know, pick the sex of the kid. She ended up having twin boys that were born on my birthday. So my 9th birthday, I got twin little brothers to deal with.
Did she sue the company?
No, you know, I think they were dealing with a lot more at the time, but it was an interesting. We were a pretty close traditional Jewish family.
Were you happy that they were born on your birthday, or were you like, God, that took away from my?
You know what? To this day, I still have issues with birthdays. I'm still scarred, and my family makes fun of me about it. But it also kind of put me in a place where I was doing things on my own. I started throwing raves in Toronto when I was 15 years old, and they became pretty big there. It was a very interesting time.
So 15, presumably a rave. You don't go to a rave sober. So you're 15, and there's drugs everywhere, and your parents are okay with it.
But well, yeah. Listen, the drug part wasn't the thing for us. It was more the promotion and the entertainment side. I was with all the DJs, and I was a promoter throwing the event. So I was more concerned about collecting money at the door than I was people selling drugs or doing drugs. That just wasn't kind of why there. It was more music and my first foray into entertainment.
So your first rave, how much money did you make at the door, and what did you profit? at 15?
We were doing about 10,000 a night.
10,000 a night when you're 15.
Yeah, and then when I got to university age, we were throwing raves at, and they just closed it in Ontario, the Ontario Science Centre in Toronto. We threw 3 raves there, which were phenomenal. My mom would work the door and she'd count cash and collect all that. She'd be like, "Holy smokes!" But we
What's
would
your biggest night you ever had?
over 6 figures.
So over $100,000 at the door, and were your expenses great with the
No,
DJ?
no, that's in my pocket at the end of the night.
Got it. And you had partners.
Yeah.
So it probably, how many partners did you have?
There was 3 of us.
So you're doing over $250,000.
It was a very profitable.
And it was a
lucrative
cash
time.
business.
All cash.
We won't tell the government.
Yeah.
And so you knew at a very early age that you could be successful.
Well, yeah, no, and it wasn't only the success of it; it was the networking and the access to people. So from the throwing the raves and working with the DJs and the promoter side of it, you know, I became very close with different artists. And then one of my close friends, Jellystone, he had a big single out, Money, a long time ago, and we were working on his album. And Napster took off.
When you say you were working on his album, what were you doing?
I was just the Jew in the room, making sure he got to the studio on time, making sure things got communicated to
So
the
your
label.
your official role was Jew in the room.
Yes.
Okay. Do you get paid for being Jew in
Yes.
the room? Okay.
Yeah.
Got
It was a good
And you
gig.
said you had 2 other partners.
No, well, they were doing their thing. I ended up getting away from doing the promotion to working directly with the artists, and we had an album come out with Universal. Napster took off. My dad, in his infinite wisdom, said you might want to have a fallback career just in case. I had a daughter, and I transitioned into financial services. So I was doing marketing for an ETF firm for 15 years. So I got away from the entertainment side.
ETF?
Exchange traded fund.
Oh, got it. So now you got a traditional job. Are you, I presume it had to have paid as much as the rave for you to go from the raves to that.
It was the finance industry, right? So it was a good income, but I hated every single minute
Why
of it.
did you switch from being your own boss to working for the man?
Having a daughter. Had to pay for the bills.
But
And
you could still pay for the bills.
the climate changed. Raves became taboo in Canada, and I guess everywhere. It was at the same time kind of dance music started to fall off from the charts, you know. You had Fatboy Slim and Prodigy and Chemical Brothers and the Crystal Method. These are all big, huge bands that, you know, towards the end of the 90s into the 2000s started to go away, and dance music kind of slipped away for a bit, and pop took off.
A couple of things that are fascinating.
Yeah.
Your mom tries to have a girl, you know, 4 times. Can't have any girls. Your first child is a girl.
Yeah, and that was the best thing to ever happen to her. She was the happiest person when she found out. So,
Second thing I want you to share with the audience, because some of us don't know this. What delineates a rave from just a big party? What's the difference between just a huge party somewhere in some venue and a rave?
marketing. It's, you know, back in the day, there was just, you would rent a building and throw it. It wasn't like it was a regular thing. It was just more of a pop-up event, would probably be the best way to term it from a relative perspective, but there is no real difference, you know?
When you're promoting a rave versus something else that you might promote, how much time do you need before it's packed? Like, do you need a week, a month, 2 months, 3 months before you publicize it? What do you, and how do you promote a rave versus a regular party?
Back then, it was a whole different world. It used to be a whole scene. Like, there would be regular weekday clubs, key nights, and at the end of every night, every company out there would be promoting and handing out flyers. It almost felt like Vegas and all the cards being handed out to you. And then there would be the main event on the weekend, and again, the community was all there. So similar to movies, quite frankly, the larger raves would, you know, have their tentpole dates picked out, and everybody would kind of work around them. But there was no real social media or things like that back in those times. It was more being at these events and just going from thing to thing and just being part of that community.
So now you're in a regular job where you hate it and you're making money. How do you get out of that regular job and convince your wife that, listen, I'm not doing this anymore, I'm getting into the cannabis business?
You know, everyone was... The interesting thing when I started telling people what I was going to do was their first response was, you really want to be the weed guy? And I'm like, yeah, I do. I don't really give a shit what other people think. My wife was always supportive of what I've done. She's like, be happy. Like, you know, you got to do what will make you happy. Like, fulfill, you know, that goal. The one thing I do tell people when I talk about this is my biggest mistake was not going into it quick enough. And it was a terrible learning mistake for me because being in the finance industry, there's a lot of lawyers and things that you got to deal with, which are a lot of fun. And I kind of straddled the fence, trying to launch the new company, but at the same time staying employed, not having that complete faith in myself to go full steam into the business.
So you kept the other job that they didn't, but they didn't know what you were doing.
Yeah.
And so what was your first entrance into the cannabis business?
Working with Paramount.
Paramount Studios?
Yeah. So we went to them.
Wait, how do you go from nothing to going to Paramount Studios? Normally you start off with Ya Buddy Studios and move up to Hey There, It's Me Studios, and then you go up to Paramount.
So I was speaking with my uncle Stuart. He was a licensing agent on traditional consumer products.
Stuart Pollock.
Yeah. And I asked him one night, can I make a Family Guy bong? And he said, absolutely not. And I said, okay, well, you guys make Family Guy beer cozies. What's the difference? He's like, well, I never thought of it that way. I'm like, okay, well, look, let's see how much knockoff stuff is in the marketplace, non-licensed product. And then we started researching it, and you said
knockoff stuff.
Yeah.
So your first entrance before Paramount was to make stuff that was like, you know, where you get in other countries that look exactly like a Gucci bag, but it's not Gucci.
No, knockoff's not the right word. Non-licensed. So if you were to Google,
well, how do you do a non-licensed thing legally?
People do that. Well, I never did that. I was trying to point out to the studio. It's again how to get people to say yes. So if you were to go right now and look and Google Star Wars bongs or Family Guy stuff, you'll find non-licensed stuff because Disney doesn't license to cannabis products. So these are all things that are being created without the consent of the IP.
And they're not stopping them.
They're not stopping them. And the interesting from Disney's perspective is like they don't care. They don't even really want to deal with it. Not to say that it's okay to do it. So we started to put this information together and started saying, hey, look, this is a missed opportunity for you. You can either monetize your IP in the space or you can have it knocked off. So that was a big thing. The other thing is, again, it goes back to my original mission, which was I wanted to change how people viewed cannabis so nobody else's grandmother would refuse medicinal marijuana. And the best way to do that is to get billion-dollar companies saying it's okay. So when we started going to the studios and going, hey, like, let's do this, Paramount jumped on right away, which was great.
So Stuart Pollock, who had Siegel licensing right now,
Mm-hmm.
So I presume that Paramount was one of his clients, and
Yes.
you kind of looked at the landscape of all the clients, and you picked the one that you thought would be the best and have the best shot at. And then within Paramount, you chose that show. Which was the first show you showed them that you wanted to do something on?
It was actually the opposite. We went and reached out to everybody, and I waited for the first yes. And Paramount was the first. Yeah.
And when you went to Paramount, did you go as a blanket for all their products and put a deck together and said, hey, this is what it would be for this is what would be for this? Or did you singularly choose one of their franchises or one of their best shows to show how it works? Like, what kind of deck did you put together?
We went in for everything. We wanted to touch any property that they would let us because, again, across the spectrum, you could have looked at, you know, their larger IPs, whether it's Star Trek, whether it's The Godfather, and you'll see non-licensed IP out there. But with them, they were great, saying, hey, we have Cheech and Chong up in smoke.
I think it's important for the audience to know, like, when you're putting a presentation together that you're emailing to people, you know, here it seems like you're putting one presentation together that shows them all the stuff that's being pirated and all the money they're losing. And then you'd have another deck, or it could be in the same pitch deck, PowerPoint presentation of what you're going to do. And then you show them what a weed tray would look like, what a bong would look like with certain shows. And how many shows do you remember within the pitch deck did you show them little products that you sort of made or created to show them what they could do?
It was really across the spectrum of product. We just took an example of each IP. So here's the Godfather stuff on rolling trays. Here's the Star Trek bongs and pipe-looking stuff, right? So it's to kind of show that we weren't pigeonholed to one IP, that we wanted to work across the spectrum.
So you said you sent stuff out to a bunch of companies. So Stuart, I presume, was on the emails.
He was the one setting up the meetings.
Got it. So you did the meetings in person.
Mm-hmm.
And so he reaches out to, let's say, 20 companies he's working with. Only how many set up a meeting with you?
All of them.
All of them did.
Mm-hmm.
So you go into these meetings, and I think it's important for everybody to know how to make a sale, because life is all about the sale. Business is about the sale. You know, it's important for anybody. Like, I always tell comedians or comedy artists when they get rejected and they're all depressed or whatever, I say, like, listen, do you think a shark is in the ocean and he misses the baby seal and he's at the bottom of the ocean going, oh my God, I'm a loser, I didn't get the baby seal? He just keeps going forward. As a matter of fact, sharks have this amazing quality that they have that other animals and mammals and reptiles don't normally have, is sharks can't go backwards. They can't swim backwards. They keep going forward. So you set up these meetings, and so tell our audience how you go into it. You know, normally, in order to be successful, you visualize what you want from the meeting, and what you want from the meeting is for them to say, hey, you've got the deal. We'd like you to do these trays for this for that for that. So you're going into every meeting, but you've never done it before. You've never pitched anybody before. You have no fucking idea how to sell somebody on these wares. Mm-hmm. So tell our audience how you went in at first, and when you got your first rejection, how you adjusted your pitch so that by the time you got to Paramount, they said yes.
I would like to take all the credit, but like anything else in life, the most important thing is who you know, not what you know. So I had that advantage of, Stuart already having relationships with the studios and with the key decision makers, that I didn't have as much gatekeeping to deal with to get to the right people. So I was very fortunate there. The interesting thing is I had to learn to adapt from what I was to who I am. So
what were you and who were you?
Well, coming from the finance space, I remember, my first meeting at a studio, first one I ever went into, I walked in wearing a suit like I normally would in the finance space, and them telling me nobody wears a suit here, never wear a suit. And, it was understanding that I can be me and not a corporate version of what I think I should have been. So that was kind of the biggest thing. And maybe, back to the whole weed consumption thing, I wasn't bothered. My thing is I love chasing the no's as much as I love getting the yeses.
Okay, so you walk in the room, you're not wearing a suit.
Yeah.
You walk in the room, what do you have to show them? What do you say? Like, what's your, how you look, you're married, right? You went on a first date. You got a second date. You went on a second date. You got a third date. At one point, the dress dropped to the floor, and your pants probably, who knows if you remember them dropping to the floor, but whatever. I'm going to get canceled, I know. But the point is that your wife decided, hey, I'm making a commitment to you. So what did you do? Something had to happen in the room where you said, "Holy shit, there was a trigger here that we did that maybe we didn't do somewhere else, and this worked."
Honestly, it was just the decision maker. The people at Paramount were younger people who were cannabis users who saw it right away. It wasn't an explanation needed as to why this was a good idea. They fundamentally got it. And because they got it, they just bet on it. They're like, here's a property at the time it was 45 years old. It doesn't matter what you do, up in smoke. Yeah. And the other thing is they were already in the marketplace with product. So us coming out with Cheech and Chong, like it wasn't going to impact Paramount in any way. So they're like, hey, sure, why not do it?
So tell us what happened.
What we did was I would walk into every meeting with like bongs and pipes and grinders, and I would just leave them samples. And when you come in bringing goodies, everyone leaves happy. And I would get told by people like, people come in with samples all the time. They're always kicking around the office. Your stuff comes in. Before the end of the day, everything's disappeared. Nobody knows where it goes, and which I always thought was funny. But what happened was it became kind of my best success story because we proved to everybody that studios see the value in this. But more importantly, we were generating north of $100,000 a year to Paramount in royalties on cannabis products on a property that is now 50 years old.
I feel that's a success story, but if you look at a movie, let's say like Malibu's Most Wanted, which was, I believe, a Warner Brothers movie, okay? I think it made a profit in the initial year of, I believe, close to $30 million or $25 million.
I made that much?
Because it was a low-budget movie.
B-Rad.
Right? I think it made 30, 40 million at the box. That's not including the DVDs and whatever happened.
Well, that's where the real money was back then.
So it was a profitable movie in the millions. They never talked about it at places. They always talked about their big $100 million things. And one time I had a meeting with one of the executives who shall remain nameless, one of the heads, and I said, how come you never talk about Malibu's Most Wanted? I mean, it was a profitable movie, and they said, Barry, that's not considered profitable for us. I mean, it's like nothing. I'm like, what, $25, $30 million is nothing? He's like, Barry, when you can make hundreds of millions of dollars. So when you say it made $100,000 for a property, I think to myself, this is like cab fare or money that you would put in a cup of somebody sitting in front of a 7-Eleven for these guys. Why did they even care about $100,000?
Because they see the opportunity, right? It's no different than owning a catalog on anything else that continues to drive value for you. On a IP that is sitting stagnant in your library, collecting dust, doing absolutely nothing, that's an afterthought. To all of a sudden start generating in revenue is a massive thing for them because it's something that hasn't come. Now, when you start to extrapolate, well, what does this really mean? Now, you look, this movie's 50 years old and it's generating this kind of regular return. What if we started this from year one? What does that compounding effect mean overall? How much revenue was lost over that time because we never did that? We worked with Sony on Pineapple Express. And, the interesting thing there was we had a ton of conversations with Sony. Pineapple Express was actually not even the property we were looking to deal with. It was Breaking Bad. And we put together a whole model for them. We showed them all the licensed product or the non-licensed product that was in the marketplace. We did a whole model, how much they're missing out on revenue. And I think it turned out to be 15 to 20 million. And, we were close and everybody wanted to do it. And then Vince Gilligan at the end was like, I have good relationships with the police. I don't really want to start bringing these products out to the marketplace and ruining that, which was really weird considering the show is about making crystal meth. So they were hesitant to speak to anybody else. And then when Seth Rogen left Sony to go to Lionsgate, I got a call the next day saying, hey, Pineapple Express is available for you to do. So we actually probably have made more on cannabis and cannabis-related products than Seth Rogen has on Pineapple Express.
Incredible. Hey everybody, it's Barry Katz, and I wanted to talk to you about Blueprint for Success. This is a community that I put together during the pandemic to help all artists of every walk of life in the entertainment business. No matter where you are in that part of this journey, it's designed to help you. There are podcasts with people that will inspire you, like Kevin Hart, Judd Apatow, Bill Burr, that you can't find anywhere else but on this program that I've interviewed, to times where we get to talk to executives in the business that you would never have access to tell you what you need to hear and to answer your questions, to all sorts of different videos and master classes designed to help you get to the promised land. That's what the Blueprint for Success is. Doesn't matter whether you want to be a stand-up comedian, a sketch performer, a podcaster, an actor, an actress, director, writer, social media person, whatever you want to be. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've had the honor and been humbled to represent people like Chappelle, Wanda Sykes, Louis C.K., Dane Cook, and probably over 20 other people who went from a studio apartment to being a multi-millionaire and a household name. And I want that for you, and I wanted to take the time with this program to be able to help you on your way there, to get there and to heighten and increase the trajectory of your career. Blueprint for Success is the way to go. I'm proud to be a part of this program, and I'd be proud to have you to be a part of it too. And so they say after you get your first sale, it's so easy after that. Was it easier for you to keep getting sales?
I wouldn't say it was easier, but it became an evolution of what we wanted to do. We were working with studios, which some experience with, Paramount and Sony were great. Lionsgate was more of a struggle, but we were working with them. The interesting thing is the people that always pushed back on what we were trying to do and made things more difficult than they needed to be are all no longer with any of these companies. And that was really the shift when we first started talking about cannabis and kind of looking at this stuff. It became, this is a great idea, but we're not going to talk about it because we don't want to get fired for bringing up the weed idea. As those people all got fired and they had to start to show how we're going to bring in revenue, everyone's like, I have a great new idea. What about weed? And then so it started leading to more. So
let's talk about the transition from now. Not that you're not licensing products anymore, you are heavily, and it's a huge part of your business. But let's talk about your first entrance into wanting to do actual content in film and television, and what your first identification of an artist was that you wanted to start working with, and then what followed after that.
It's interesting because things just kind of fall into place. We purposely, when we started off, only worked on accessories and not any cannabis consumables, specifically for ease of access to the markets. With rolling trays, grinders, things of that nature, they were legal in every state. You didn't have to worry about regulation and go through all the loopholes to get into those marketplaces. And then as we started building relationships with Paramount and Sony and Lionsgate, there was an agent who tried to double dip at Miramax between Kevin Smith and myself. And Kevin and I just said, fuck this guy. Let's just create our own company that covers all of your IP in the space.
Why don't you talk to the audience about what it means to double dip in those kind of deals?
The agent was trying to get a fee from both sides of the party as kind of an extra payment for putting the deal together versus taking his traditional one side of the fee. He was trying to take from both sides and get more than he should have.
Did he have a job after Kevin Smith kicked him to the curb?
It wasn't Kevin's agent. It was, and again, it's how relationships are and how things evolve. So it was the agent for Miramax who was doing it.
You should send that guy a fruit basket.
Stuart and I still laugh about it. And the interesting thing was he was doing that, and Kevin at first and was a little hesitant to get anything going because they were handling all of the licensing and stuff on the non-cannabis stuff. And I said, well, you know, I have somebody who can handle that for you instead of you dealing with this. And they're like, amazing. And so I put them in touch with Stuart, and Stuart started handling all of Kevin's stuff from that moment forward. And, you know, we did our thing. So we set that up. And at the same time, you know, we started bringing strains of weed to the marketplace. We worked with a company that was based out of LA called Caviar Gold. Phenomenal product, the best product in the marketplace. They have the only patent on cannabis infusion. Mike Brunson, who's the founder of Caviar and developed this.
Tell the audience what cannabis infusion is.
So cannabis infusion is when you take a strain, I like to call it the Coca-Cola formula. So what Mike is able to do is he's able to create a strain that's always the exact same. So you can never grow the same plant twice. It just doesn't happen. So weed is not always consistent in what the final product is that you consume. The infusion process takes terpenes and distillates and puts it into the flower and allows it to become a final product, a manufactured final product. So because of that, he has the ability to create a bespoke strain to what, you know, Kevin wants or whoever wants, and he's able to replicate that every single time. So that product is always consistent, whether you buy it in Oklahoma, in California, in Arizona, it's always going to taste the same. Where regular weed you grow, you don't get that same consistency.
And so just so our audience knows, how did you identify Kevin Smith as the first person or entity that you wanted to do films with? Because I know you're working on a film with him right now that's about to start production, which you'll talk about. But how did you identify, okay, this is the guy, and then how did you get to him without having it all fall apart?
You know what? We did a call.
But I mean, how did you get the call?
The Miramax set up the call.
So Miramax.
Yeah,
got it.
Miramax
So
and the
they
agent.
were the liaison.
They were in the middle. We were setting up the call.
I understand. So they were the ones that helped you. Got it. Okay, so I got that. And so you're doing this stuff. And how do you convince Kevin, hey, listen, we've never done a film before, but we're going to help you finance it. And we believe that the weed products will end up making more than the movie itself.
So it wasn't like that. We didn't finance the first one. What happened was we did this first call with Kevin. I remember this clearly. I gave him the whole backstory of where I'm from and my grandmother and everything. And I got through the end of my spiel, and he's like, you had me at Toronto. And I was like, awesome. And so...
The sale.
Yeah, well, listen, being from Toronto helps also, I guess, for someone who loves Canada. So it was just more like, it was just that feeling, that chemistry right away. So when we went and we started speaking, it was, let's do these products, the accessories and everything. Kevin was the one who introduced me to Mike. We started looking at a couple different opportunities for...
Kevin wasn't the one that introduced you to who?
To Caviar.
Oh, got it.
So we were working with other companies on the strains that just weren't coming out how we were happy with. Kevin actually, the dispensary down the street from his house is where Caviar was based out of. Lash, a gentleman from Caviar, awesome dude, set everything up. And it was just kind of destiny. It all worked out. And Mike created a great product. And then we started looking at it.
What's the product that Mike created for Kevin?
Well, there's three. There's Snoochie Booches, Snoogans, and Berserker.
And these, what's in these? What when you open the package, what's in there?
What we've done in there is there are little comics in the side. So like the Bazooka Joe back in the day, you open it up, there's a little comic. We've done that with those as ways to, again, not so much gimmicky, but to have kind of engagement in it.
I always say, study greatness, imitate greatness.
Yeah.
Become great.
I like to say imitate and innovate. That's kind of my view on
All
things.
right, that's quicker.
So we started looking at, okay, we're launching these products. We're doing this. Where are the challenges and where is the opportunities? The challenges were when it comes to cannabis across the board, whether it's the U.S., Canada, what have you, you're not allowed to advertise. It's illegal to advertise. You can do certain things, but you can't do any kind of commercials or things like that. So it's a challenge. How do you market a product that you're not allowed to advertise? The loophole, which is not really a loophole, but it is a loophole, is if it's an art, it's not considered advertising. And it goes back to kind of Seth Rogen and kind of our thinking around stuff. The genesis of the business idea came from listening to Seth Rogen on Howard Stern. He was talking about Pineapple Express. And what ended up happening was when they made the movie, like they just came up with that name, like just out of thin air. It wasn't anything. And they just needed a name for the movie. And 2 weeks after that movie came out, every single dispensary had Pineapple Express. Every grower was calling it Pineapple Express. But because it wasn't licensed or anything, it wasn't like revenue was going back to Sony or to Rogan on that. So it's just like, fuck, they couldn't control it. So we're like, oh, okay, what if we do this from the beginning? Because they advertised a whole strain. That whole movie was a commercial for Pineapple Express, right? Like, to this day, that strain is the most popular strain out there. And the reason for that is...
That's the most popular sales strain.
Yeah, and it's not because it's one manufacturer of a strain or anything. Everybody has a Pineapple Express. The reason that it is so popular is what ends up happening is a new state will legalize. So when a new state legalizes, the newest entrants to that marketplace are older people, 55 plus. And the reason for that is the younger people who are buying weed, they're already buying weed from their dealers and it's cheaper. So when weed is legalized in a state, the price relative to the black market is so high. So the only people who buy from the legal market are older demographics because they look at it and go, okay, it's legal. I have access to it. I'm just going into a store. I'm not buying it from a drug dealer. So it gives them this comfort into trying out the product. And they go into a dispensary and they'll see a million names on the board and all these options and everything. It'll become overwhelming. And they'll go, oh, Pineapple Express. I know that. I'm going to try that. Because it's just, subconsciously they know Pineapple Express. So that's why you go into any dispensary nowadays, you'll find that. And that strain tends to be...
But how come the company doesn't protect the trademark?
They never thought of it.
But
Studios
but
never...
But they're losing millions and millions.
I know. This is the sales pitch when I go into them. And then, again, it became an evolution of what we tried to do. So we saw that we had an opportunity. So as Kevin was doing Jay and Silent Bob reboot, and we actually integrated the strains as part of the storyline. So it's not a product placement like in Wayne's World when, they're showing the Pepsi and the Pizza Hut and, that whole joke scene about all the product placement stuff. Like, it's actually part of the movie. And again, we carry that through with Clerks 3. So we were able to establish the brand in a universe that allowed us to advertise when our competitors aren't allowed to advertise, right? And we're able to kind of repurpose that content to allow us to do it.
So without disclosing the amount of money that the Kevin Smith initiative has made, put into perspective, Kevin Smith's merchandising, let's say, before you got involved was, let's just say he was making $100 a year. What would you say? How many times greater did this merchandise?
What he on his merchandise stuff? I don't know his numbers. That's
no, I'm talking about
on the cannabis stuff. We've done phenomenal. The one thing I can say is consistently, sales have always been consistent, and we've done more in gross sales than his past two movies have done in box office.
That's incredible.
So, which is great for us, and it continues to grow. And we're real excited about the new one coming out, which is going to kind of add to that.
Got it. And that new one, you did something new where you brought people in to finance the movie.
Yeah. So we've kind of evolved our business to become, what I like to say is the Disney of cannabis. our view was, before I was licensing out other people's IP, which was great, but we've looked at it as how do we evolve it and start doing something that's, our own IP, and create something that's special. So we've evolved our business to become the Disney of cannabis.
All right, so you become successful with Kevin, and normally in any situation, now it's time to go out to the next actor, producer, person who does film and television. How do you identify Ice Cube, and how do you get in a room with him, and how do you convince him to do something with you?
So that's the thing I look at is I just want to work with people I'm fans of. And not only that I'm fans of, but like it's organic and authentic to what we're trying to do. The biggest challenge that a lot of these companies in the cannabis space had when it came to celebrity strains and brands and things like that was they weren't authentic and they weren't as engaged in the product. So it made them short-term kind of plays versus kind of long-term stable growing brands. So that's kind of how I've always looked at it. Who's authentic? Who wants to be involved with this? With Cube, it was Jewish geography, really, to be honest with you. Again, through my uncle Stuart, God bless him, he's helped me out. His best friend growing up, Larry, ended up moving to California 30 years ago, and he became next door neighbors with Ice Cube. And when things started going well with Kevin, I was down here and I was talking to him. I'm like, hey, if Cube's interested in doing some weed stuff, I would love to talk to him. And he's like, let me see what I can do. And said, okay, he has 15 minutes. Like, he could come over to his house. We'll go talk to me. I have 15 minutes. And I was like, okay, great.
So now you have to pitch on a time limit, 15 minutes. Now, what normally happens, as any person knows, when you go into a meeting and somebody says 15 minutes, you sort of know that you're going to get more than 15 minutes if you deliver, if you over-deliver, and if you don't, you're getting 15 minutes.
So at 15-minute mark, Larry's like, well, it's been 15 minutes. I got to go. And Cube's like, okay, see you later. Dan, can you stay? And, we sat and we spoke for about 3 hours, and it was just really awesome, kind of getting a sense as to why he was getting into the cannabis space. Like, we were very much in line kind of what we were trying to do and what we were trying to accomplish. But he was very aware as to where everybody else has been in the space. And when he wanted to do it, he wanted to do it the right way. And he was very particular as to who he partnered with, how things would be done, how the products would come to the marketplace, how they looked. So he was great. Like, he was so much into building this up the right way and being involved in it because he's passionate about it, which was awesome. So it just became an evolution. Like, maybe it was the confidence that we did this with Kevin that I know it can be done. Maybe it was just good timing that he was looking at actually entering that space. But I don't look a gift horse in the mouth. I'm just happy, and I take advantage of that opportunity.
And then you started with the merch again with him, which took off and did phenomenally well. And then now you're working on a movie with him.
We're working on a slate of movies. It's not just with him and with Kevin. We've started looking at really kind of changing the entertainment space. So, and it's real interesting because every day there seems to be more and more backing to our thesis. So we started kind of looking at it as the proof of concept with Jay and Silent Bob and Reboot. Even though we weren't financing it, we were involved and we were benefiting through the sales of merch and everything else, and really establishing that. We took it to a bit of a next level. Last year, we shot a movie with Jojo Siwa and called All My Friends Are Dead, which just came out the beginning of August. We had our premiere at Tribeca. Very small budget movie. The great thing about that was we did the same thing. So in the movie, we introduce a strain and, character's a real podhead in it, but it's not a stoner movie. It's a slasher movie. It's funny, it's scary, it's gory, it's great. But we introduced a strain in that movie, and what we did was we were shooting in May. We had the product on shelves by July 1st. And the movie didn't come out until, almost a year later, over a year later from when we shot it. So the interesting thing with that was, based on the cannabis sales, we actually have generated, a break even on sales of the weed before the movies come out. So everything from a box office and OTT and all that stuff just becomes a multiplier effect on the revenue that we've already generated. So it's really kind of changed the model as to an independent feature being able to maximize kind of, revenue from a merchandising thing where independent films never do that. So we've really started, taking it from the example of, okay, we've done it this way. Now we financed it this way. People have seen the vision and they've seen that it works. And it's not just like, here's a great idea from a couple of podheads. We have the actual data to support it. So, and again, Kevin has really helped shown how it can work. The touring with the movie really changes kind of the dynamic as to how people take in content. So from that, we've really started building out the slate. All My Friends Are Dead out now. Please go buy it and rent it and watch it. Shooting New Jay and Silent Bob later this year. And then kind of we have a slate of some great projects I'm really excited about that are going to continue to shoot. So
one of the reasons why I know you is because one of the projects you're working on, probably top secret, with Brad Williams to try to shoot to shoot a movie next summer with him in a way that no one's ever done before. So excited about that.
Me too. And again, that's why I know you, right? Like, I chase the yes, and I'm not concerned about the no. That's one of my favorite stories is how I got involved with Brad. Like, I bought a ticket to go see him at the Comedy Store and waited for him after. And I said, hey, I want to talk to you about two things no one's probably ever spoken to you about. I want to make a weed strain with you, and I want to make a proper action movie with you. And it's like, what? Oh, yeah, let's do that. And I think that's the thing. Again, like I said, there's more and more stuff kind of supporting these ideas. Vince Vaughn coming out talking about the lack of hard R comedies and why studios have gone away from doing that, yet there's a marketplace for it, right? And I think it's a missed opportunity from kind of the comedy that's out there, kind of, maximizing the silliness that, and politically incorrectness that people are striving for. And it all kind of ties together, whether it's the weed and the comedy and the movies.
And I consider you to be a really creative person. A lot of people don't know this, but you've written scripts. You have projects that are really original and unique that you've actually done yourself. Mm-hmm. But you've been unselfish and you've kind of taken yourself out of it. And I know you're going to be doing more of those in the future. And I know in those you'll be very creatively involved, and because they're your projects and they're things that you mean a lot to you. When you're working on these other projects, do you find your hands tied as being creative and you have to be more of a business person, or do you like being more creative?
I like being creative in the business. I think it's show business, right? Like, that becomes a problem I think people forget sometimes, is the business part of it has to be sound. So, just even kind of our modeling of what we're trying to do to be different from everybody else, it's really the business side of it, but it's how to be creative with the business side that I like. The challenge for me is the left side, right side of the brain. Like, I really enjoy the creative. For me, I like, and my kids always laugh because I'm always taking things too far from a joke perspective and have no filter. But I think that's funny, right? Like, I think life is too short, and I'd rather just go and crack jokes and do things. And like I said, for some reason, I'm a big believer. If you have a little person or a in a movie, it's probably going to be really good. And I just want to start bringing that kind of joy back. Movies, weed, it becomes an experiential thing, right? Even comedy, right? Like, people go smoke a joint and you go with your buddies and you're watching a show, right? And these are all experiences that I think, especially after COVID, we take for granted, right? Like, now people complain about the movie theater business and everything. It's because you try to go see Deadpool and Wolverine with your wife, and between the two of you, it's costing you $85 to go see a movie and popcorn and all that stuff. And it's not even an experience. It's something you could see on Disney Plus in like 45 days, whatever their window is. Where now, when you introduce the weed part of it, the comedy part of it, the experience part of it, it becomes an event. And, I think for us, we're trying to shift that, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I remember, because you're not a big pothead, but for the potheads out there, part of smoking weed is rolling up with your buddies and passing the joint to the left and having those conversations and having those experiences. And we're just trying to do all that, bring all that experience together. No different than the Disneys of the world. We're just focused on a different audience.
1, 2,
3, 4, 5, 6.
6 degrees of separation.
6 degrees of separation. I'm going to say some names or some topics or whatever, and just tell me your thoughts, whatever, a short story, a sentence, anything. I guess I should start with something that means something to me. Is the first movie I think I ever worked on in my life. And what's your thoughts on the influence of it in your business, Half Baked, with Dave Chappelle, Jim Brewer, Harlan Williams, Stephen Wright, and so many others?
First of all, classic. To this day, like I said, the Bob Saget, have you ever sucked dick for weed, is still hilarious. And again, a Toronto filmed movie, so seeing a lot of the locations that I knew very well. I love that.
That's
movie.
right. In Toronto.
I used to go to the Pizza where Harlan killed the horse. So on Yonge Street, I know exactly where that is, and whenever I see it, to this day. But it is funny because that last line of the movie, when he's like, "I love weed, but I love pussy even more," I think about that now, and would he still make that same decision?
All right, Kevin Smith.
The real kind of surreal thing for me working with Kevin was the first time I ever saw Clerks was at Woodstock in '94. They just put the movie on unannounced or anything at 11:30 at night. I think it was Metallica who just finished, but like it was the last show of the night the band was done, and they just put on this movie, and like it was life-changing for me. I had no idea what the hell was going on, and I remember laughing my ass off to this movie, and just remember seeing it at Woodstock. To flash forward all these years later, Kevin showing me Jay and Silent Bob Reboot in his house and being on set with that. So, to start off seeing a movie at Woodstock, to even be at Woodstock, and then all these years later have that experience is amazing.
Bert Kreischer.
Bert is awesome. The interesting thing about Bert, I think, was, again, somebody who just doesn't give a fuck. and for me, like, I love seeing that, right? And the way he intertwines kind of that attitude with his family, I think is so heartwarming. The way he talks about his kids and his wife and the experiences that he has with them has been, and how he ties it together is great, which I really think is fascinating just as someone kind of viewing him from a distance when it comes to cannabis now lately is the shift in his health and what he's been doing, yet cannabis has still played an important role for him, which it goes back to, like, how can people be successful stoners, right? And, like, it's just kind of seeing kind of everyday integration of that kind of stuff and how it can be, and just someone like him and just seeing that kind of stuff's been kind of fascinating and interesting. Plus, he's a cool dude.
Ice Cube.
Again, for me, it's very surreal. He's the nicest dude, one of the nicest dudes I've ever met. But for me, I remember growing up at a time in Toronto where there weren't many kids like me listening to hip hop. And, growing up and being kind of made fun of as a wigger for listening to hip hop and listening to NWA and Public Enemy and things like that, to now being able to call him a friend and working with him is just, again, those surreal experiences of where I came from to where I am today, just it gives me such an appreciation for what I'm doing. And whether it's because I was fans of them or, because I always hear you never want to meet your heroes. And so far, the heroes that I've met have been just dope as hell. And the real thing from, that I find fascinating from both Kevin and from Cube has been their view on how they do stuff. They don't let perfection hinder them from moving forward. And it's not so much about like, okay, that's the worst thing on earth. Let's get negative about it. It's just like, okay, don't worry about it. Let's just keep going. And for people like that who have to deal with so much kind of nonsense on a regular basis, to not let the little things sweat them too much has been actually kind of fascinating for me. Like just having a couple conversations with them, and they call me, especially Cube says I'm too Canadian, I'm always apologizing. But it's just kind of, just how supportive and down to earth they are, and that perception of, how you need to work with certain people, it has made my life so much easier. And I think it's helped talking to other people because I understand where they're coming from and, how to recognize like, hey, no, this isn't the end of the world. Like, it's cool. They've been awesome when it comes to stuff like that.
Your proudest moment in show business?
Proudest moment is you. Like, we went to the Tom Brady roast.
Me?
Yeah. And you'd met my brother, my sister-in-law. My brother is a massive stand-up fan. He was actually, it's funny, he's a big fan of you because when I started saying, hey, I'm meeting with this Barry, he's like, Barry, I've listened to his podcast all the time. I'm like, oh, wow. When we went afterwards to the store.
Oh, and downstairs to the Ciro's private bar downstairs.
Yeah, and to be in a room with all those guys, and you like just seeing how you were like Don Corleone in there, the respect that all these legends coming up to you and being able to be introduced to you by them. But it was so...
You met, I mean...
It was everybody.
You should tell the audience who was there that night.
Chappelle, Kreischer, Tony Hinchcliffe, Jimmy Carr was there.
Sam J was there as well, which was fantastic. She did really great as well.
I can't even think. I feel bad. Paulie was there. It was everybody. Everybody you could imagine.
Andrew Schultz,
Schultz was there. Oh my God, Shane Gillis was there. Everyone.
And you got to understand this bar. If you've never been downstairs or privileged to be downstairs, this bar is probably the size of like 4 of these podcast studios where we're in. It's a very condensed area.
So to be in that room and being able to have my brother there with me, who I know. That experience was...
You guys met everybody.
Yeah. And for me, I guess...
Kreischer was there too, right?
Yeah. And for me to be, being around celebrity and working with the stuff is kind of part of the gig, right? So it was still an amazing experience, don't get me wrong. It was amazing. And like I said to you, it's an experience you cannot put a dollar figure on. You can't pay to be in that room again. Like, there was a moment in time that was just so incredible. But for me, it was my proudest because I got my little brother there who got to experience that, and to know that impact that it had on him, that was amazing for me.
That means a lot. Your biggest disappointment in show business and how you used it to fuel yourself to the next level?
No disappointments. I'm always expecting challenges. I don't let things disappoint me because disappointment's a waste of time. It's just another challenge. Whether it's a no, whether it's, this obstacle or that obstacle, I get to do this. There's no disappointments. I could be digging ditches. I could be, out doing something god-awful and hate it. I could be back in the finance industry that I hated, where Sunday nights were the worst. I'd have the stomach aches and dreaded going in and doing it. Every day is kind of fun. So, even on the worst days, there's no real disappointments. How do you be disappointed? I got to hang out with you.
Last question. What advice do you have for the young person growing up in just a regular neighborhood in a regular city who just doesn't really know the direction that they're supposed to be going in, and then comes to terms with what works, what doesn't work, and how they enjoy and have the kind of career that you're having right now.
I don't know about you. Growing up as a Jew, we'd always have to go through Sunday school and Hebrew school and learn all the stuff for our bar mitzvah. And religion, I'm not a religious person, but religion is important to me. And the thing that I've learned as I got older that I'd never really understood about religion or anything is the leap of faith. And like, that's what faith is. You got to take that leap. You got to believe in it. Otherwise, it's a fact. Like, you have to believe in yourself. Like I said, I hesitated to start my business. I always was concerned. I played two sides of the fence. I never really took that leap of faith, which caused me a ton of headaches. And you know, take that leap of faith. If you love something, if you're passionate about something, there's nothing worse than not attempting it. Like, go for it. What's the worst that's going to happen? You know, most people kind of get stuck in this idea of what needs to be done and how you need to do stuff and what's important. And, you know, it's easy to say money isn't the most important thing, and it's not. Like, it takes you earning a little bit of money to recognize that that money is not. Like, I know a bunch of millionaires that are the brokest people I know just because of how miserable they are. So it takes a while to learn that, but you have to just follow what you want. Like, that's the thing. Like, there's been too much, you have to do this versus just be passionate about it. If you're passionate about it, it actually works out. Like, if you do what you love, it just comes to you. Just be grateful. Like, that's, I tell, you know, all the time people, how are you doing? I woke up today. Everything else is a bonus. Like, one of these days, that's not going to happen. That's, and maybe that's maturity or whatnot, but like, I just look at it now. I'm in an industry that I love. I work with people that are just cool. I get to have these amazing, unique experiences, and I'm even fortunate enough to share that with my family. And it's all because I took that leap. If you don't take that leap, you'll never know. And it's interesting, the questions I got around that after COVID. The amount of friends I had from the finance space during COVID who were working at home who said, how did you do it? Like, well, I hate this. Why? I wanted to do something. Like, what did you do? And it's like, you got to do it. Like, if you don't do it, and you see it with comedians, if you don't get up on stage, you're never going to get better. If you never, you know, get over the fact that you had one bad night, you're not going to get better. If you don't put in the extra work, but if you do, and you love it, look at Brad, look at all these guys you've worked. You've seen it firsthand with how many of these guys, right? And I'm sure that's kind of the through line in all these guys. They didn't care about the negativity. They just kept working and just, they love it and they're passionate about it. And you can, it's very interesting, like you bring it up, you don't see this with rock stars, you don't see this with actors, that they'll come and hang out and discuss this kind of stuff, which is fascinating, right? Like, you see these guys, that through line seems to be that passion. Take that leap of faith, go for it, who cares?
Dan Rubin, let me tell you something. I am completely high right now from your advice, from everything. I know it sounds corny, but it's unbelievable to me that somebody can be, you know, influenced by cannabis and have such an extraordinary, clear mind and vision about what it takes not only to get to where you want to go, but what it takes to run a company in the present and reflect on the past. And what we never mention here is to create a family unit that is as strong and powerful as the day you met your wife, and you've been together probably for 25, 30 years. Yeah. And to me, like, that makes you somebody who I have the utmost respect for, the utmost love, and thank you so much for sharing this.
Thank you. You're the best.
I appreciate it. You too, buddy.